What does it mean when federal judge blocks Trump's executive order trying to federalize elections and tighten voter requirements nationwide? When Judge Colleen Collar-Catelli issues permanent injunction against sections requiring proof of citizenship for voter registration?
On Friday, a judge blocked most of a Trump administration order that would have tightened voter requirements nationwide, a move critics say could have disrupted vote-by-mail systems in both Oregon and Washington. Corey Johnson breaks down that ruling.
The federal judge in this case ruled the president overstepped his authority. The order would have required proof of U.S. citizenship to vote and that all mail ballots arrive by Election Day, changes that could have significantly impacted vote by mail in both Oregon and Washington. Now, the judge's ruling comes after both states sued, arguing the order could disenfranchise tens of thousands of voters. The court says the Constitution gives Congress and the states, not the president, the authority to regulate federal elections.
When the ruling says Trump overstepped his authority because Constitution gives Congress and states, not the president, power to regulate federal elections, when states like Oregon and Washington successfully argue Trump's order could disenfranchise tens of thousands of voters by disrupting vote-by-mail systems, when Trump continues threatening to end mail-in voting entirely, claiming it's fraud despite having no evidence, while Oregon officials push back saying mail voting with paper ballots is actually less expensive and more secure, yeah, that means we're potentially watching a president who might be testing whether he can simply ignore judicial orders blocking his election interference, whether he'll comply with court ruling or continue pushing policies that federal judge determined are unconstitutional, whether this could become pattern where Trump administration keeps trying to federalize and control elections despite courts saying he lacks that authority. And here's why this matters so much. Because Trump's response to this judicial blocking order could reveal whether he recognizes any limits on presidential power over elections. The court ruled explicitly that Trump exceeded his constitutional authority, that he cannot unilaterally impose federal requirements on state-run election systems, that his executive order violated separation of powers. That's federal judge telling president he broke constitutional boundaries. And the question now is whether Trump administration will comply with that ruling, will stop implementing the blocked provisions, will respect judicial check on executive overreach, or whether they'll try to defy or circumvent the order through continued pressure on states or through appeal process that might drag out enforcement. Think about what that means. Trump has been threatening to end vote by mail nationwide, claiming it's fraudulent despite no evidence supporting that claim. When reporter challenges him saying many countries use mail voting successfully, Trump just dismisses it without addressing the actual facts. Oregon officials correctly point out that mail voting with paper ballots is less expensive than in-person voting requiring specific locations and times. But Trump doesn't care about efficiency or evidence. He cares about controlling election systems, about creating conditions where federal government rather than states could oversee vote counting, about laying groundwork for challenging results he doesn't like by claiming mail systems are fraudulent. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built John Brown Show, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you appreciate what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. All right, let's get back to the video. Now let's break down what Judge Collar-Catelli's ruling actually says, because the specific legal reasoning matters for understanding why Trump's order was blocked. The judge found that Trump's Executive Order 14248 tried requiring citizenship checks for voter registration through federal programs like public assistance forms and military postcard applications. That might sound reasonable on surface, ensuring only citizens vote, but the constitutional problem is that Trump tried imposing these requirements through executive order without congressional authorization and without respecting states' authority over their own election administration. The Constitution gives Congress power to regulate federal elections. States also have significant authority over election procedures within their jurisdictions. What Constitution doesn't give is unilateral presidential power to rewrite voter registration requirements through executive fiat. That's why the judge ruled Trump overstepped his authority. He tried doing through executive order What would require congressional legislation and state cooperation? That's violating separation of powers. That's president attempting to seize authority that belongs to legislative branch and to states. And the practical impact of Trump's order would have been significant. Oregon and Washington, which have successful vote-by-mail systems, sued arguing the order could disenfranchise tens of thousands of voters. How? By creating new bureaucratic requirements for proving citizenship that many legitimate voters might struggle to meet, by disrupting established systems that work efficiently, by potentially forcing states to reject valid ballots that arrive after arbitrary new deadline Trump wanted to impose. All of that would suppress legitimate voting while solving problem, non-citizen voting, that's already illegal and extremely rare according to judges' findings. Share this video with everyone you know because here's where Trump's broader election strategy becomes clear. He's not actually concerned about election integrity in sense of ensuring legitimate votes are counted. He's concerned about controlling election systems in ways that could benefit him politically. Attacking mail voting even though it's secure. Trying to impose federal requirements on state systems even though that violates Constitution. Threatening to end voting methods that make participation easier for working people who can't easily take time off to vote in person. All of that serves political purpose of making voting harder in communities that might oppose Trump, while creating narrative that any results Trump doesn't like must be fraudulent. And judges' ruling specifically noted that voting by non-citizens is rare and already illegal. That's court finding that Trump's stated justification for his order, preventing non-citizen voting, doesn't actually address real problem because problem essentially doesn't exist at scale Trump claims. Non-citizens voting illegally is already criminal offense. States already have procedures to verify eligibility. Documented cases of non-citizens voting in federal elections are extremely rare. So Trump's order wasn't solving actual problem. It was creating solution in search of problem, or more accurately, creating pretext for federal intervention in state election systems. Make sure you're subscribed to John Brown Show because now let's talk about what compliance with this judicial order would require. The judge issued permanent injunction blocking specific provisions of Trump's executive order. That means Trump administration is legally obligated to stop implementing those provisions. Federal agencies cannot require citizenship checks through the programs the judge blocked. States cannot be threatened with loss of federal funding for refusing to comply with the blocked provisions. That's what the law requires, now that judge has issued this ruling. But the question is whether Trump administration will actually comply. They have options. They could appeal the ruling to higher court, which is normal legal process. They could comply while appealing, stopping implementation of blocked provisions until appeals process resolves the issue. Or they could try to ignore or circumvent the ruling, continuing to pressure states or implementing similar provisions through different mechanisms. And that third option, if Trump chooses it, could constitute defiance of judicial authority, could lead to contempt proceedings, could escalate into constitutional crisis about whether president recognizes court's power to check executive overreach. And there's pattern forming here. Similar rulings came down in January in Oregon and Washington state cases. Multiple federal judges in multiple jurisdictions are looking at Trump's election policies and reaching same conclusion. He exceeded his constitutional authority. He's trying to federalize systems that belong to states. He's violating separation of powers. That's not just one judge with political agenda. That's multiple federal judges, appointed by presidents of both parties, applying constitutional law and reaching similar conclusions about limits of presidential power. Now let's address Trump's massive fundraising war chest because his financial resources create concerning dynamic where he might believe he can overwhelm opposition through sheer monetary advantage even when courts rule against him. Reports indicate Trump's political operation has nearly $400 million in cash on hand across various committees and passies. That's unprecedented political funding. That's 3 times what Democratic groups have raised. That's enormous financial advantage heading into 2026 midterms. And what could Trump do with that money if he's willing to defy judicial orders? He could fund legal battles challenging every adverse ruling. He could pour money into supporting candidates who promise to help him circumvent judicial checks. He could run ads attacking judges who rule against him. He could build infrastructure for challenging election results in every close race. He could essentially try to buy his way around constitutional limitations through massive spending on legal battles and political campaigns designed to entrench his power, despite courts saying his actions are illegal. The money itself isn't illegal, obviously, but combined with willingness to ignore judicial orders, combined with threats to federalize elections despite courts saying he can't, combined with pattern of attacking any institution that checks his power, that financial advantage becomes tool for potentially undermining constitutional system. When president has unlimited money to fight courts, to support allies who will help him defy orders, to punish states that comply with judicial rulings by supporting their opponents, that creates dangerous situation where financial power could overwhelm legal authority. And here's what concerns constitutional scholars who might be watching this situation develop. When courts issue orders blocking executive actions, normal process is compliance pending appeal. President doesn't have to agree with ruling. Administration can appeal to higher courts. But while appeal proceeds, they're supposed to comply with injunction. That's how rule of law works. That's how separation of powers functions. Courts check executive branch can appeal to higher courts, but executive branch doesn't just ignore judicial orders because they disagree. But Trump has history of testing those boundaries, history of attacking judges who rule against him, history of suggesting courts that oppose him are illegitimate or biased, history of claiming he has authority that courts say he doesn't have. So the question becomes whether this judicial order blocking his election interference will be another boundary Trump respects or another norm he tries to destroy by simply refusing to comply and daring anyone to enforce the ruling against him. Now let's talk about what happens if Trump administration refuses to comply with judicial order. First, there could be contempt proceedings. Courts have power to hold government officials in contempt for refusing to comply with orders. That could lead to fines, to court-ordered compliance, to escalating legal consequences for continued defiance. Second, states that sued to block the order could seek enforcement. They could ask court to impose penalties on federal agencies that continue implementing blocked provisions. They could seek injunctions against specific officials who defy the ruling. Third, and most concerning, there could be constitutional crisis where executive branch openly defies judicial branch, where president claims courts have no authority to block his election policies, where federal agencies continue implementing unconstitutional orders despite judicial prohibition. That's breakdown of separation of powers. That's president placing himself above the law. That's exactly the kind of authoritarian overreach that Constitution's checks and balances are designed to prevent. So here's where this leaves us. Federal judge blocked Trump's attempt to federalize elections and impose new voter requirements, ruling he exceeded his constitutional authority. Trump has been threatening to end mail voting and federalize election systems despite having no authority to do so. The question now is whether Trump administration will comply with judicial order or continue pushing unconstitutional policies. And Trump's massive $400 million war chest gives him financial resources to wage prolonged legal battles even when courts rule against him, creating potential dynamic where he tries to overwhelm judicial system through unlimited spending on litigation and political campaigns designed to entrench his power, despite courts saying his actions are illegal. If you want to stay on top of stories like this, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Do you think Trump will comply with this judicial order blocking his election interference, or will he try to defy the court ruling? Because honestly, his response to this injunction could determine whether we're still living under constitutional system where courts can check executive power, or whether we're sliding towards situation where president with enough money and enough willingness to defy norms can simply ignore judicial orders he doesn't like. Share this with everyone because this is about whether rule of law still means anything when president decides courts don't have authority to stop him. Stay tuned.